Good evening, everyone.
Hello.
Hi.
For our attendees that are out there, I just wanted to let everyone know that we're going to wait for a couple of minutes before we start.
Uh-oh.
To log on and we should be starting.
Well, so while we wait, how is everyone doing? It's like kind of weird just here, like looking at each other's faces. I don't know.
I know. Timing couldn't be any perfect. They're vacuuming outside my office in the building. So
Okay.
like I kept on muting myself and I'm like, I'm sorry.
I don't hear anything.
Okay.
Me.
Okay. We have
Yeah.
about
So how?
1, 2, 3, 4, 6 attendees so far.
Oh, well, is that including us?
No.
So
We're on a different.
minus, look, 3. So, well, Destiny be 4, so 6 people. So I don't remember everyone. So Natasha, you're from the YWC. Well, because I see your sign. That's
Mhm.
okay. And Sabrina,
Yeah, I'm with the Committee Against Domestic Abuse.
Okay, yeah.
I do education and prevention with them. So, and
Okay.
I just started in August. So, so I'm excited to be here and to be part of these
Yeah.
conversations. Yeah.
Destiny, are you there?
Yes. Can you all hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Can you see too?
Yes.
Okay.
You're
Perfect.
you're a little delayed though. So
Okay. Hold on 1 second. Let me make sure I'm connected to the right Wi-Fi. And also I have an attendee who is having, oh, 1 sec. I'm going to switch Wi-Fi's.
okay.
Okay. There we go. Is that better?
Yeah. Oh, I'm so sorry.
Your picture is frozen, but I can hear you.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. 1 second. Let's see. Okay. Is that better now?
Can you see us?
I see everyone except for Sabrina.
Oh, I'm here.
I mean, I can hear you, but I can't see you.
Okay.
Oh, there you are. There's your picture. Okay.
Oh.
All right. Perfect. Perfect. And have we let our attendees in already?
Yes.
Okay,
We
great.
have a total of 7 attendees.
Okay. Okay. Perfect. All right. Well, we've already been delayed enough. So I think we should get started now that some of our technical issues were worked out, and we wanted to give people time to log on. So I believe everyone was introducing themselves. Am I correct? All of you ladies were just introducing yourselves?
Just briefly.
Okay. Okay. Perfect. So I will introduce myself for people who may not know who I am. So for those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Destiny Owens, and I do kind of a lot of work in our community, but my work with the YW, I work with their racial justice department, or should I say I am the racial justice department? I mean, it's, it's pretty small. We're growing and working. And I also have a business here in town called Black Excellence Around Minnesota, and I do racial and cultural diversity counseling and public speaking and all the other stuff through that. And so I want to thank everybody for being here tonight. It is a very important conversation, and it is one that I think we can all agree is it's about time that we have it. So all you other ladies have the opportunity to introduce yourselves, correct? I just want to make sure everybody knows. No? Okay, so I did mine. And then we have Natasha Lopez-Rodriguez with us. We have Sabrina Mercedes with us and Pamela with us. We can start with Natasha. You can introduce yourself first.
Sure. I'm Natasha Lopez-Rodriguez. I am the Executive Director for the YWCA Mankato.
And Sabrina?
I'm Sabrina Mercedes, and I am the Education and Prevention Program Manager with the Committee Against Domestic Abuse, or CADA.
Pamela?
Hi, I am Pamela, and I am an educator, and I am new to Mankato area and excited to be here.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you, ladies. So before we really get started, there's a couple things that we want to do. The first, I just want to remind everyone that because this conversation is something that's very important, but also something that is not a conversation that's had most often. I want everyone to remember that there may be some things that you hear about demographics and statistics and true stories and facts and people's personal experiences that might be triggering to you, or it might be something that you never knew and you learn something new, and that's a great thing. But I want to remind everyone of that. And also, I want us to remember that throughout this conversation, we want to make sure that we are being mindful and respectful of everyone, all of our panelists, all of our attendees, and remembering that the conversation is surrounding the women of color who are murdered and missing, and how we can change that and bring awareness to that. So to start, there are two things that we wanted to do. The first is to acknowledge the land that we are on and the indigenous people whose land it was, as well as the indigenous women that once lived on this land. And then also we will pay our respects to Breonna Taylor, being as though this is something that was inspired by her. So to acknowledge our land, we will let Sabrina Mercedes be the one to lead us in that. And then I will give our acknowledgements for Breonna.
Thank you so much, Destiny, for organizing this and including us in this conversation. We're really excited to be part of it, and we are Mankato. Yeah, the land here in Mankato is, I like to share with people that Mankato is actually supposed to be called Mankato, which means bluish green earth. And because of a spelling error that was never fixed, it is now referred to as Mankato. And I think that history is important to talk about because we are talking about the roots of oppression. And that's where we have to begin, is to know our history and to know the truth about the land that we are on, even though it's uncomfortable. This is also the land where the Dakota 38+2 were ordered to be hung by Abraham Lincoln in 1862 on December 26th. And so I always like to take a moment to acknowledge that horrific time in history and pay my respects to the indigenous peoples who suffered on this land before us. Thank you all for joining me with that, and thank you, Destiny.
Absolutely, 100%. It's necessary. And so, like I mentioned earlier, a huge inspiration for this conversation is Breonna Taylor and the lack of justice that she has received after having her life stolen from her. She was a bright young woman who was serving on the front line during the midst of this horrible pandemic our country and the whole world has been going through, and was murdered within her home. And so at this time, I would like for us to take a couple of minutes of silence to just recognize her life and who she was as a person, a daughter, a sister, a friend, a cousin, an aunt, a girlfriend, and all of those many hats that she wore every day. So thank you. All right. Thank you so much for that. So there are a couple of topics that we're really going to get into this evening, and our panelists are going to dive deep into those topics. If you have a question, there is a Q&A section where you can type that in there and we will get to those questions throughout the time of us talking and having this dialogue and this important conversation. And so the first thing that we want to talk about here is, of course, the topic of Breonna Taylor and how the justice system has failed her and the systemic pattern that is continuously failing women of color. So we want to take a look at the lack of justice that we see, right? We know that in our country, there's a lot of murdered and missing women. And for whatever reason, there is no recognition for this. There's barely any TV time for this. There's a lot of things that take a place in this, and why this is such a big thing. I'm going to let other panelists elaborate, and then I will go last concerning this particular topic. So whomever would like to start first.
For me, I would say, being an African American woman, and I'm 55 years old. I've had 55 years of really being oppressed. I mean, and just really feeling the pain of recent activities, whether it be Black men or Black women or other people of color, and just having to navigate through my career and myself as a woman is becoming increasingly difficult. And I'm not sure if this is the time or place, but just suppressing my feelings just so I can live day to day is really not a healthy place. So I really appreciate this time of sharing and getting these things out in the open. I think it's really important. I have 2 daughters of my own. I have a son, and so I try to be, well, I am supportive of them, and really try to bring those conversations to light so that they can be healthy human beings. And my hope is that all women of color have some kind of outlet and somewhere to go when they have experienced these things, because I know that you have. If you are living in society today, you have faced some sort of racism. And so it's a big deal. And yeah, I mean, my hope is to find healing for us and safety, and provide tangible things that we can do to help either, the individuals that are on the panel or participants, just walk away with something that we can really do, action, even if it's just one thing.
Okay. Sabrina, would you like to kind of go next?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I echo what Pamela said. I'm 32, and I feel navigating the world with intersecting identities, including being a queer person, has been scary, and it's been a challenge. And even to openly say that and to own that identity is still very scary in this time. And I think when we're talking about injustices, I often think about, well, who wrote these laws? Who were the laws written by? And nobody that looks like me or looks like you, or, so that's what comes to mind right away. Also, systems. I often think about the history of nonprofits. I always like to share with people that the history of nonprofits is rooted in creating boarding schools of Indigenous children, removing them from, their families, and that has turned into foster care. In the modern world, we talk about how slavery has turned into prison. So, when we're talking about injustices, especially of women of color, I have to look at our systems. They're not meant or created in ways that really fully support survivors and people who experience violence, especially when you are a person of color. It is very scary to ask for help. On top of that, when we take into account our culture is violent, we use violence as entertainment. You know, it's in our music, it's in our movies, it's, you know, it's the same story. And if people are only seeing one kind of story, then when people or loved ones experience violence and they come forward, people don't believe it then. Like, that doesn't actually happen in that way. And for a lot of people, they don't truly understand how complicated violence has become in our culture, and how insidious it is. And you know, it's at our fingertips when we can see these crimes that are taking place. So it's very sad, but women, specifically LGBT children, you know, the most vulnerable of people with disabilities, are the ones who suffer the most, because this society isn't really created in a way that supports them or believes them. So I'm really glad we are talking about this. These are hard topics. People don't want to hear about trauma. They don't want to hear about violence or rape or things like that. So it's important that we're having these issues come to light. So thank you. That's all I have for now.
Okay, thank you.
I'll go. Being a Latina, as a Latina, and I'm fairly Caucasian, obviously, as a Latina, so I live in both worlds. I can assimilate into what is the white community really easily until I speak or somebody sees me. And then the discrimination comes from there, and the oppression, per se. Being raised, I'm actually Puerto Rican, so and I moved here from Arizona. So I get lumped into different groups. People think that I come from Mexican or South American culture, which I don't, and then trying to explain. So I have lots of layers of having to explain. I've actually lived on the island, so I've seen other levels of oppression within your own culture, which we think we're on the island, we're all Puerto Rican, we should be fair to each other, and then there's multiple layers of oppression that happen within your own culture. It's just very interesting. I'm new to Mankato as well, just like you, Pamela. I moved here last year in August, and it is a little bit of a different world. It's just interesting. I still haven't found what you would say like my community, my people. So I'm still struggling with that. But the layers, it's just what happened to Breonna, George Floyd, the names can go on. It's just completely systemic. I saw layers of it in Arizona. I lived through SB 1070, driving while being brown and black. You could get pulled over for no reason. And I have. I was pulled over once. I must have looked a little more Latina that day that I actually got pulled over. Reason why I got pulled over? Following too closely. Like, how does that even make sense? But it's just any reason to be addressed or taken advantage of in that way. But I've actually been behind somebody and I pulled over with them because I knew she was another Latina like myself. So it's watching out for each other to avoid this levels of systemic and making that change. I was asked by the police, why did you pull over? And I'm like, just in case you think anything's wrong with her. As a female, I would have done that to anybody. It didn't matter the color, because the layers of oppression and the layers of systemic racism is just so evident unfortunately, in our policing system. And not all police are like that, and I understand that, and we're having awesome discussions about that, but we need to help each other too. So I love that we're having this conversation so that we can each build upon each other and help each other move out of whatever we can. And then again, that action, finding that action so that we can start changing.
Absolutely, yes. So thank all you ladies for sharing. And so I'll just elaborate a little bit on this first topic here. So as we know, Breonna Taylor did not receive the justice that she should have received, right? The officer that was charged, Brett Hankinson, he was charged not with murdering her, but with recklessly firing his weapon into an apartment building. That's not justice for her. That's a way to say, I've given you something, now leave me alone, right? For those of us who are women, we know and understand what that feels like. We've experienced it at one point or another. We've seen it at one point or another. So we understand that it it wasn't really justice that was given unto her, right? Um, we know that one of the biggest issues with this is that, and one of the things that's overlooked, and I think that a lot of people fail to realize, is a lot of what you ladies have already said, right? It's a culmination of everything you all have shared. The having to suppress how we feel, right? So we don't really want to report when something's going on just culturally, right? Because, well, what are they going to do? I don't know, right? There's so many women who have called the police to their homes for help, and they end up getting killed or harmed or blamed. And then it becomes victim shaming and things like that, right? So there's suppressing how we feel and what's going on with us. There's a lot of oppression when it comes to these types of things, where we'll report or we'll say something, or a Black woman is killed and the whole world knows about it, like in Breonna's case, and people are still divided and they still don't know, they act as if they don't know what's right and what's wrong, when we can clearly see it is never okay to enter someone's home, right? um and just go in all willy-nilly shooting around like you don't have good sense, right? Like it's just common sense for most people. And so when we think about the women of color who are pushed to the side, they don't get the media coverage that they should, the number is ridiculous when we think about women who have been murdered. So we have like Sandra Bland, right? Tasha McKenna, Michelle Cossix, Katherine Johnston, who, by the way, was 92 years old. Corinne Gaines, Tatiana Jefferson, Tanisha Anderson, Charlene Lyles, Kanika Jenkins, and a lot of other women who I can guarantee, as I've named off some of them names, a lot of us have probably never heard of those names before, because there was no media coverage for them. And so that's one of the many ways that the system has failed them. And then, of course, when we talk about women of color who have gone missing, right? So many women of color who have gone missing, like Kimberly Arlington, LaQuanta Riley, Breonna Mack, Nanette Thomas, Miss Goldsmith, Kiana Burton, and Donna Mitchell have all gone missing, nowhere to be found. And again, these are names that I'm sure a lot of us have never even heard before, but there's literally no media coverage on it. And there's so many reasons as to why. But when we look at all of these women who are missing, all of these women who have been murdered, that knowing that they have not been talked about or respected enough to get media coverage, for it to be all over the world, for people to know that they're missing or murdered, or when the world does know and there's not a fair investigation, there's not a fair sentencing of the people who have done these wrongs, right? We see that it adds to what a lot of women of color don't want. I don't want to say how I feel, because if I say how I feel, what happens? Because if we're at the extent of women being snatched off of reservations without anybody saying anything, right? Women leaving for work, leaving for school, nobody saying anything. Why would my voice be heard if it's just little old me and I'm having an issue, or a man is stalking me, or I noticed, in my neighborhood, I have this eerie feeling, or I don't feel safe anymore. So there's so many ways that the system has failed Breonna. So many ways. When we add up all the different things that people have gone through, all the different ways that people have made steps to say something, and then we see a woman who clearly her life is just not valued the way that it should have been, We are seeing systemic racism and prejudices played out right before our very eyes. And people aren't paying attention to it or giving it the time that it deserves. So I think that, much like you ladies, this is why this conversation is extremely important, because we don't have time, I feel like, in this day and age to sit back and say, okay, well, what are we gonna do? I don't know. You know, we don't have time to say things like it is what it is, right? We don't have time to do that. So I'm grateful for everyone who's here as a participant, as well as all of you ladies who are on the panel with me, so that this conversation can start today. And the goal is, hopefully, it will be a continual conversation even after we leave this particular setting. So thank you all for sharing all of those things. So our next topic to talk about is, why is there not any recognition for the thousands of women and children of color that go missing every year? So if you ladies could elaborate based on, you know, what you know and maybe even what you've experienced, and then again, I'll go last. So whomever wants to start.
I guess a lack of empathy in our society, first off, and a lack of empathy for people that look different than what society thinks is who we should care about. And I think it does, and you stated the other night when we came together, it starts with voting, and it starts with voting people in office who do care about our issues. Um, and you know, we have to get policies on the books that reflect how we as people want our society to look like. So until we actually do the work and get that done, basically people are blowing smoke and they're just like, I don't care about your rioting. Like, you can riot from sun up to sundown 365 days a year, but until you get a law on the books and policies in place, nothing is going to change. And I don't know if people really understand that. And that's how, I mean, the work, that's how it begins. You know, you have to recognize, I mean, there has to be people in the media that care about our stories. If no one in the media cares about our stories, they're not going to be in their little newsroom and say, oh, hey, I think I need to put this on, you know, on the air. The editor is going to say, so-and-so needs to be on here, not, you know, this person. And I'm not going to name, but we all know we're just not cared about, and we're not in the boardrooms, we're not in those high level positions to make the decisions to say, this person needs to, this person is missing, and their family loves them just like you're, you know, I mean, I could go on and on and on, but that's my piece.
Okay. Sabrina, you want to go?
Sure. Yeah, I definitely echo what Pamela was saying about representation. And again, that I was taught by some elders from the northern part of Turtle Island about blood memory and about tracking. And so when I think about that, and I think about this discussion or this topic of why, you know, maybe we're not searched for or cared about in the same way, I think it goes again back to who is telling the stories, who is in charge of the stories. And us as, you know, passionate about our cultures, you know, we're storytellers. but that right has been taken away from us. We have not been allowed to tell our stories. We have been told our stories for us, which then in turn, makes us believe that we are not important. And so when you think about that, psychologically, if you're, in a boarding school, you're put in foster care, you were taken from your family, you're suffering from this trauma, you turn to drugs and alcohol, all you see is representation of you as a savage, or as, someone who's dirty, or, not clean, all these stories that are told about you. You're going to believe those things. And so not only are we not represented, but we're not given an opportunity. And so I think that's a big reason why, these kinds of injustices with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and the countless other people that you named, Vanessa Guillen, even, I think about her often. And I served in the military, and I experienced sexual assaults in the military. And it's, it's the culture that we live in. And that's not to say that every single police officer is bad. That is not to say that every single military person is a bad person. I'm not saying that, but the systems that are entrenched in patriarchy and violence and machismo-ness is very unhealthy. And many of our indigenous cultures and roots, even as African people, we lived in matriarchs, and women were revered because we are the portals to the universe. In many tribes, and this was told to me by a good friend, indigenous friend of mine in the Pacific Northwest, but she told me in her tribe, in her language, that there are no words for hit or to punish or rape or domestic violence, because that's not how they lived. When communities were suffering with someone, or someone was suffering and making bad decisions, they would embrace them and say, what do you need? How can we help you? And then the last resort would be to shun them or to send them away. The first response was never, I'm going to punish you. Also, when we're talking about this issue, decriminalizing minor crimes, so if someone's in danger and they want to call the police, but maybe they're underage and they have been drinking and they got raped, and now they're scared, they're not going to call the police if they think they're going to be arrested. And let's face it, we're not having these conversations because the public trusts the police right now. As much as we want that, we do want that, but it's not happening. And so we have to recognize that there needs to be some sort of restorative justice within, our communities. We need to tell our communities that we're going to show up for them. And I think we're doing that here in Mankato. I'm very proud of Mankato Public Safety and the work that they're doing. I can definitely say that there's conversations happening about how to improve when we're talking about these issues. But yeah, that's my take on that.
Okay. Natasha?
I gotta say, focusing kind of on the missing, I think of Amber Alerts. How many times do you see an Amber Alert for a person of color? It's far and few between. What population get notified for Amber Alerts. Why? Who knows? Sometimes the family chooses not to report because it can lead to other issues, just like Sabrina was saying. Also is that we put the blame on the person missing. Well, maybe they made the wrong choices, or maybe it was something they did, or you got the other side with these, well, maybe they just wanted to leave. Maybe they were escaping something, but that doesn't justify, why aren't we looking for them? Why aren't we trying to find them? Same with those that are murdered. They say that it was their fault. Oh, maybe they put themselves in a bad situation. The situation doesn't matter. They're no longer here. Let's focus on what happened and why did that happen? Not just because of some choices that they made. Just like George Floyd. when the case came about, they started to pull up all his dirty laundry. I'm like, that has no relevance to what that police officer was doing to him. So same for Breonna. They started to pull her past her history. Doesn't matter. Somebody shot her in her hallway for no reason. They were looking for somebody else, not even her. So it's just like, we always put the blame on that victim and not the issue. And that's what we need to change. And it's not just the attorneys and the people investigating. Sometimes the public opinion is what puts them in that highlight too. We, as a community, sometimes we're just as fault, and we need to stop doing that. Even for ourselves, we need to help each other out. Find ways that make that person that highlight. She was accomplished. She was an EMT. Like, she had a degree. She was prosperous. She wasn't like, oh, not doing anything. And that still doesn't justify. Even if she was on unemployment, it doesn't justify what happened to her. So it's that type of stuff. We ourselves, we need to hold those individuals talking that accountable for what they're saying about these individuals. So that's
Absolutely. No, and I agree with all of you ladies. All you ladies had amazing points. Even to the point where Pamela was talking about getting laws in place. There definitely has to be laws put in place. I mean, it's really sad that we live in 2020 and there has to be laws put in place to protect women of color. But then I think back to recent laws that had to be put in place to protect Black women to be able to wear our natural hair and it not be legal, that we're discriminated against. And it's 2020. And so you would never think that such a thing would be needed, but it is. And then even to what Sabrina was talking about, when those images are put out there of you, sometimes you start to believe that, especially if you have not seen positive images of people who look like you, to give you something else to look up to and look forward to. So that in itself, we have to shift the narrative and change the images that are being put out there and what we are accepting in our respective community about ourselves, you know? And then even to what you were saying, Natasha, about Amber Alerts, right? Amber Alert came about because a young white girl named Amber came up missing and they created a whole alert for her. But then I think back to the young lady from Florida who was Black and was stolen from the hospital and was missing for years, okay? Never anything about her. And that happened way before the Amber Alert needed to even be created. And so when you think about instances like that, that speaks to women of color and children of color going missing and it never being a second thought. And so when you think about it, so when it comes to this particular topic, right, women of color and children of color being missing has been happening for hundreds of years, okay? But for whatever reason, there's been no talking about it. There's been no support behind it. Nothing has been brought to the light about it. So when you look at the number of people who's missing currently, right, which is about 613,000, 60% of that is missing people of color. No one knows that because it's not something that's talked about publicly. So when I think about missing and murdered people of color, particularly women and children, there are stereotypes that are put out there that make this something that makes people of color invisible when they go missing, right? So when you put the stereotypes with something that has been called missing white woman syndrome, which was coined by a news anchor, and the phrase came about because when you see stories about missing people in the media, it's usually middle class white women or children, and they make sure that they put their family on the TV and everybody's crying and there's so much sympathy that's being drawn in. But think about how many times Breonna Taylor's family was on TV. Think about how many times Sandra Bland's family was on TV. How much sympathy was drawn in for them, how much empathy, how many people really felt where they were coming from. And then you look at the stereotypes that are put on people of color, And when you have a Latina girl, a Native American girl, a Black American girl, Asian American girl, when they go missing, it's like, oh, they probably just ran away. They'll be home. They'll be fine, right? I remember having to call myself like, hey, like, what is happening? What's going on? I had a little cousin who was missing. We were sharing everything all over Facebook, whatever, you know. And even in doing that, I remember looking and I'm like, okay, like what's going on? Even when it comes to sharing Facebook posts, I think I might have had like one person share it. And I was like, and my cousin is Latina and Black American. So I was just so I was taken back because in my mind, this is a young girl. Like she's not no grown woman who, you know, should just be out at 12 or 1 a.m. because she can. This is a young girl we're talking about. She's what, 14, 15 years old? And so a lot of the time, the stereotype that's put on women of color and young girls of color is that if it's young girls, it's usually, oh, well, she probably just ran away. She'll be home. It'll be fine. She'll return, you know, or if you don't see her in 24 hours, give us a call. And we all know that the first 24 hours is the most important in any investigation, in any missing person, anything. So to make a parent, a family member wait 24 hours for someone who's missing, unacceptable. And that law needs to change. That standard needs to change. And then when we look at women who are older, the thing that's usually paired with them in terms of stereotypes are, well, were they involved in any drugs? Were they involved in any type of a domestic relationship, right? Were they involved in any gang activity? What? Right? Like when I hear these things and I hear the questions that people have been asked when they try to report a missing family member, a missing person, it baffles me because that makes zero sense. Because the questions that are asked on the flip side, when it's not a person of color, a woman of color, a child of color, it's none of that at all. When was the last time you seen them? Were they, you dropped them off at school? What were they wearing, right? There's this urgency that women and children of color who go missing don't get. And so when we talk about why they don't get that recognition, that's why, because the stereotypes are automatically placed on them, the lack of care, the lack of empathy, lack of sympathy, and the lack of having a law in place that's going to protect these women and children who go missing. And that's something that we definitely need to make sure that we work to change. And it's going to take the whole community of people of color to push that and make that happen. Whether it be men or women, we all have to work together to get that done. And so that leads us to our next point of discussion. And I think this point of discussion is one that is very near and dear to me because I think it's important for people to hear these particular perspectives and experiences and what we've seen. So the other thing is how this current epidemic is impacting our community, right, as a whole, but then even individually. How is it impacting the Latina community, the Latinx community? How is it impacting the Black American community? How is it impacting the Native American community, right? Like, obviously, we're all women of color, but I know that what they may be experiencing on the reservation may be different than what we are experiencing off of the reservation, right? So as a woman who's Black American, Cherokee Native, and Geechee, I wanted to make sure that this question was put in there and that we could really elaborate on that because there's so many things going on. And so Pamela, we'll start with you again.
Well, you know, COVID has hit me like really close to home. Both my daughters had COVID. My oldest daughter, who is 30, had COVID early on, barely had any symptoms, lost her the taste and smell. Recently, I would say Labor Day, my 22-year-old got the virus, and so her symptoms were a lot worse. She had the fever and the chills and the chest, like feeling like something like was heavy on her chest, with the lungs and everything. I mean, I was really concerned with her. And what made it just so horrific was I could not be there with her. We did FaceTime over the phone, and she went and got tested, and I thought, oh my God, I was with her like around that time. And I actually thought I was going to have to quarantine. And with us just going back to school, I mean, it was just really, oh my God, it was really bad. And so she got called by the health department. I'm on a rant here, but um, I think for me, maybe I see it a little differently. I see young people maybe not taking it as seriously as they should. So as a mother, as a grandmother, I may see it a little bit differently, because I'm always trying to protect myself. I had my 81, no, she's 82-year-old mom, sent her to Oklahoma because I didn't want her surrounded by a bunch of young people just going out willy-nilly, having her be susceptible to the virus. So I think, I mean, there's two things. I know it's affecting people of color at an alarming rate. And honestly, I don't know why. I mean, I think maybe they don't have access to healthcare or testing and stuff like that. Maybe they don't have the money to go get tested. But I can honestly say for my family, I've kind of been the one to say, let's all be responsible and then go from there. Like really take a personal responsibility in yourself and in your family and make sure that you're doing all that you can so you don't affect your family in, in doing whatever you can to control it. I mean, it's a real thing. We all know our president right now has the virus, him and his wife. So it's a real thing. It's a deadly, deadly virus, and you never know how it's going to affect you. It's pretty scary. Huh? Oh, I'm sorry. I'm reading the comments. But so yeah, I mean that's pretty much like for me even. I mean, it's really sad because I can't see my family like I want to. And for me as a mom, my kids are in St. Cloud, they're in Minneapolis. My mom is in Oklahoma. I mean, it has affected my emotional state of mind. Like I was just talking to my husband about it the other day, and I'm like, I'm used to having family dinner, seeing my grandkids, hugging and kissing everybody, and really having that emotional connection. And it has just really been really, really difficult not able to have that. So that's how it has affected me personally. Sorry, I went on and on.
No, you're fine. Thank you. Yeah, the COVID pandemic itself I feel like currently it's playing a bigger role in the epidemic of missing and murdered women of color, right? Because, and that's a whole nother subject for a whole nother day, the lack of care that we get when we go to the doctor's office, right? And the role that it plays on our communities respectfully, right? And how that can be perceived as one thing, or somebody could come along and say, hey, like, what do you need? Let me help, whatever. And that's not really what they're trying to do. So there's a whole, it's a pandemic, but there's also an epidemic going on. So I hope that made sense. Hopefully that made sense. Because it kind of just intertwines with each other too. So Sabrina, if you want to go ahead.
Yeah, I would say that, again, I think about the systems and kind of like the history of like specifically sterilization of women of color and a distrust with the medical community, Western medicine, and again, just like the systems that are in place. Also, we're seeing, as you know, sexual and domestic violence shelters, like it's becoming concern because people are at home with their abusers, and they, you know, children or women that maybe, or I shouldn't say just women because violence does affect everyone, but the majority of what we see is women. Sexual and domestic violence are also already, prior to the pandemic, it's been one of the most underreported crimes for years because of this distrust of the system providing justice. Again, you know, we're on reservations, it can be really difficult also, especially sex traffickers and man camps for like pipelines specifically will hunt on reservations because of the ambiguity between the laws that are in place, and state and federal police officers sometimes don't get involved with things that happen on the reservation. So when we're talking about missing and murdered people of color, specifically, you know, the whole movement of missing and murdered Indigenous women, people don't talk about it because there's no accountability. And so there's no structure of holding people accountable for the people that go missing. And specifically when we're told stories of, you know, we don't care about you, or we are fetishized or sexualized in certain ways in the media. You know, I've had men come up to me and say pretty vulgar things to me regarding my race. And you know, just recently even, and it's terrifying. It's absolutely terrifying. And when people do decide to report, you know, the way police officers are trained to ask questions makes it feel like it's very victim blaming, or, you know, they're trained to investigate, they're not trained to support. And that's, when we're talking about these issues, they're very complicated and complex, and there's just not enough conversations that have been had about the systems, the reporting processes, the way families can come forward. Again, we talk about, you know, if there's drug or alcohol addiction, they're less likely to call the police. Sometimes when they call the police, they're like, oh, well, that woman was a known prostitute. Well, oftentimes when women are involved in prostitution, it's due to trauma or violence, or they are forced into that kind of work. So when we're criminalizing women who are stuck in situations that they do not have control of, and then we punish them when they ask for help, they're not going to ask us for help. They're going to have this disconnection. And then, like I said, it is honestly shocking and sad when I started to learn about reservations and how people know that police officers won't follow through because they're not well equipped, they're not well trained, they don't have the funding, and sex traffickers will go to those lands to take people from there. And it's happened in Minnesota on the ships. You know, I in my younger years very much could have been one of those women who maybe had a little too much to drink and ended up on a boat thinking, hey, I'm gonna, you know, party, and then the ship has sailed, and you know, there's been, they know in cases women have just been thrown overboard. So again, when we're talking about these issues, there's a reason why it's not talked about. It's been happening on such a large level that the follow through and accountability is not there.
I'll go ahead and talk next. From the Latinx or the Hispano community, we can take the situation of immigrants that are here, maybe not with all the right documentation. Are you going to report that something happened to you? It's going to cost, it causes a ripple effect. ICE will show up at your door. People are just fearful of any form of law enforcement when they're entitled to those services. And they should be able to call the police if something horrible is happening to them without that fear of having to be deported. The Latino community, that's a constant issue. And also, even as Sabrina kind of mentioned, the machismo. Machismo is like, well, that's what she deserves. That's what she's a subordinate below me, so she should expect those type of situations. So again, it's that I've seen more and more Latinas rise, and we're becoming more empowered, and that's good. And we're unfortunately here, I would say in Minnesota, I saw a lot more movement in Arizona when I lived there. But I'm not going to say it was everywhere. If you traveled to Yuma, any on the southern of the state that were closer to Mexico, it was still a little more old school. Their cultures were different. In Phoenix, a little more modern. Women were more empowered. We were forming organizations and fighting some of that injustice. When you come to farmlands here in Minnesota, they live in the shadows. They're hiding away from anything just in case. You just never know. And then there's a very large indigenous community within the Latino community from Guatemala. They don't even speak Spanish. So then you have another barrier. They speak a different language. So it's just a constant layers of different situations that they're facing. And it's not to overuse the word systemic, but it is, unfortunately. And we need to help them, empower them, find them resources, being able to reach out to your consulate that can help you. ACLU is working on these type of work, as well as Minnesota, Unidos Minnesota is also working to fight for some of these things. So it's getting the information to that community so that they know that they have those resources. And we have to try to find them. We have to go find them because that community, unfortunately, is hiding away more and more because of everything of our current political situation. So it's just a constant ripple effect, and that community will continue to go missing because nobody's going to report anything. You just don't know where they end up because they've been taken somewhere else. And the family's scared to report because they don't know what it can cause for their other children that are with them. So
thank you, ladies, for sharing. And so now I'll just kind of, speak to this a little. So I know for the Black American community, this has been something that's been pretty, I would say, traumatic in terms of a lot of women who are missing and murdered, and they are not given the justice that they deserve, right? I would say there's a lack of protection and a lack of safety that we feel within the community, because for Black women in particular, we've had to endure generationally, right? Being snatched from our land, brought to a land that we did not know, that was stolen from Native American people in the first place, put on the land to work the land. And then the Black family was separated, and we were kind of told, like, now you do it. And so that has perpetuated through generation and generation and generation and generation and generation. And because of that, now here we are, 2020, and the thought is the Black woman can do it all. And then if we don't do it all, it's like, well, what are you doing? You're supposed to be able to do this. You're supposed to be able to do that, right? You're supposed to be able to feel unsafe, unloved, know that you're disrespected, feel unwanted, and see the lack of protection and the lack of safety, and endure trauma and still be expected to suppress that while living in oppression and be okay with every day, knowing that Black women and children are also coming up missing and nobody's saying a word, knowing that you are raising Black children, but at any given time, if a police officer is feeling a little excited with their weapon, can really harm or kill your child. So there are so many components when we talk about the epidemic of missing and murdered women of color. And from what I'm speaking to currently, like in this moment, Black women, there is so there's a burden that Black women have carried for so long that it's expected that we just keep carrying that burden. And kind of what to Natasha spoke to, sometimes the thought is, well, that's what she gets, right? She shouldn't have been somewhere she wasn't supposed to be. Or, well, she's a woman, so why is this even a discussion? When we look at the way that we are portrayed to the world and the views that are put out there, and the thought of the angry Black woman, or the woman who should not have been there, should not have gone there, what did she have on, who was she with, none of these things matter. If you go missing, you go missing. If somebody harms you in any way, or whatever the case may be, that's a problem. But there's so much healing that has to take place between all of our communities and this country, that it has to start somewhere. It has to. Like, we can't continue to live in a system that's so broken that people of color as a whole are oppressed. But then you have women of color who, that's a whole nother level, right? Because even when we talk about the women's suffrage movement, that was supposed to be for all women, but technically the only people that really benefited from that was white women. And when they got their right to vote and they got what they wanted, they were like, see ya, I'm out. So even thinking about women wanting to come together with other women, regardless of what you look like, there's a lack of trust in that as well, because we tried that and it didn't work out so well. When, we think about the systems that have been put in place, much like Sabrina spoke to, when you think about child protective services and them coming in and separating families and doing all these things differently, right? I wonder why, so for child protective services, they send out a CPS worker and a police officer, right? They don't want anybody going anywhere unsafe or whatever. So why is it that if a woman calls and she says she wants to report a rape, you all are not sending a social worker, somebody who is trained to be empathetic, trained to listen, trained to ask questions that victims should be asked? When a family reports a person missing, especially if it's a person of color, why are we not sending people who are trained in trauma help, people who are trained with the ability to speak to people with empathy, with sympathy, and they're there and they really want to know what's going on? And so that kind of leads us into our next question, which is, what can we do as a community to raise awareness about missing women of color? And what can we do to help women of color who we may see in situations where it's like, okay, you seem like you're kind of out here by yourself. What should I do? What can I do? So I think we'll discuss that, and then that's our last topic, and then I'll wrap up and close out. And so we can start with Miss Pamela again, and then Sabrina, and then Natasha.
Can I go last, or can I go second to last? I kind of messed up that last question.
Sure, no, you're okay. You can go second to last.
I totally missed the mark.
You're fine. You can go second to last.
Oh, relevant. Don't worry.
Okay. I actually thought about this question prior. And for me, last year I was honored to be on it's called Educators for Excellence. And so that particular group of individuals, they actually train you to create like policies and go to the legislature to have laws on the books for teachers and to get more teachers of color into the school system and more social workers of color and things of that nature. So I guess my mind immediately went to the laws on the books. And honestly, I think there ought to be some sort of law just for women of color. Totally. Like, we are not including any other race. I mean, in this is for women of color, um, for either being murdered or missing or just and even on the job, being discriminated against. I don't know how to put all that into an eloquent way of wording it, but this is kind of what my mind goes to. It's like, we're important, we're loved, we contribute to the success of the United States of America as a whole as women of color. Um, I'm a teacher, and here, I mean, I'm probably right now the only teacher of color in the building, and I have to say that I know I contribute greatly to my students. I don't care what color they are. Um, but other people probably don't think that same way. And I know that because of the way I'm being treated. So there has to be laws on the books to say, hey, these are women of color, they're important, they're missing, they're murdered, and they need to be in the media. We need to have maybe extra coverage because of what we've done in the past. These women need to be put to the forefront. There needs to be, we're important. And people need to know that we are important. We are loved. We have families just like you do. I mean, and I'm really tired of being put on the back burner just because of what I look like or what I believe in, or I mean, just really tired, you know. So
Thanks, Pamela, for sharing that. I am also tired. These talks are exhausting, and they've been happening for a long time. When I do this work, I always tell people that I'm standing on the shoulders of giants. There's people that came before me that have been trying to do this work for such a long time. And that's what inspires me to keep going, for my daughter also. And action. We need action. We need our communities to be willing to learn and to be wrong and to say, we're not doing this right, how can we do better, and to ask the experts. We're here. We're ready to help you. We would love to help everyone understand violence in our communities and what that looks like here in Mankato. And it starts with this conversation. It starts with, as we're moving through October, which is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, if communities or organizations want advocates to come speak, CADA can provide that kind of stuff. I always think about, it's in my title, education and prevention. And so educating our communities, what do you do when someone is being assaulted, or when someone's in an uncomfortable position? We can't have the Minnesota nice, passive aggressive niceness anymore. We can't do that. When we see oppression, or when we see racism, or when we see homophobia, when we see any of these things, we need to find a way that is comfortable for us, considering our safety, to speak up and to do something. And my expertise is actually in bystander intervention, and I'm happy to come talk to your organizations for that too. Like, how do we have these uncomfortable conversations? Because people in rural Minnesota don't like to be uncomfortable. And I think we need to move past that. We have bloody history. That's where we need to start. And then we need to work from there. And we need to recognize that Mankato is an amazing community, but we need we can do more, and we have to do more right now. And so along with policy changes, I think as a community, we need to take responsibility and say, I don't know enough about this, so I need help. I need guidance. I need to know. Talking to our kids, you know, about consent, about, you know, how to speak up for themselves and other people. And it doesn't even always have to be about assault, you know. So just really focusing in a grassroots community effort of, hey, we want everyone to feel safe, no matter what you look like, no matter what you believe in. We want everyone to be safe. So yeah, that's what I would say about that.
Okay. Well, mine, what I would say that a way of action is to give somebody a seat. We all need a seat at the table. That's how we start change from any form of, I can take the simple example as a board membership, having a seat at the table to make that change. I can think of programming. Look at programming that are offered here in Mankato, in the community, and look at who's taking advantage of the services. We need to stretch that level of service to out into the community when it comes to whether it be youth programming or adult programming. I'm seeing always the same faces and the same color of faces. We need to start reaching out to communities so that we can get involved in things and how change happens. Take city council, for instance. Look at the people on the city council. That needs to be more demographic of what is in this community. So it's little things like that. We need to start running for positions, whether it be whatever level that may interest you. I love the board. If you look at our current election ballot and who's running for school board, there's 4 spots available. There's diversity finally. There was one person on there before that was a person of our community of color. Other than that, that needs to change as well. So it's just different things. Just like Pamela was saying in the school district, I looked around at my son's, I just started in our school system here. My son's a kindergartner. He originally started at Franklin and he got moved over to Roosevelt. Both of his teachers were white women. They're wonderful teachers, great people, but I'd like to see diversity in there. But I know that the universities here are graduating students of all races. Why aren't they applying for jobs here? A concerted effort needs to go out to recruit that are people of color into those positions. So students there that are attending can see somebody that looks like them. So that's what I would say. We need to start, even if that's little, like it's not that big of a change, but an effort needs to be made.
Thank you, ladies. I appreciate all of y'all sharing that because it kind of showed me that we are all in sync, because that's pretty much, I feel the same way, literally feel the same way. Tired of being put on the back burner. I feel like there are changes that need to be made in order for these things to change, and it'll help the community. All of us kind of coming together to say, you know what, hey, what can we do to make these things change? What can we do to change the invisibility for women of color who are going through these things, for women of color who have been missing and murdered, and how can we do something different? So I'm with you all on this. I know that there are certain things that we can do, and one of the biggest things is to encourage people. You know, when we think about the schools, right? Encourage people. If you don't know who's running for school board, get to know them, right? Especially for the people of color who are running, so that we can have some diversity. I am from the Mankato area, pretty much. I've lived here pretty much my whole life, and there's not been a lot of diversity. I've never had a Black American teacher. I've never had a Latinx teacher. I've never had an Asian American teacher, not even in college. So for me, that's a problem, right? Because we want better. We want to do better. So that's my thoughts on that. But I see that we have a question in the Q&A area, and so I want to make sure that we read this quickly. And so it says, what do you think can be done to stop the criminalization of Black girls in the K-12 school system, i.e. suspensions, being charged, etc.? So I can speak to this one if y'all are okay with that. Okay. So I think one of the things that needs to be done, and know it or not, I'm working on it, is to remove the officers from the schools, number one. Number two, make sure that all school staff are trained and have had courses in racial equity, but also understanding culture as well, having cultural training as well, understanding that cultures are different. And so, for example, like I said, I grew up in the Mankato area. I went to Mankato East and I graduated from Cato Public Charter, which was Riverbend Academy when I graduated. And one of the things that I experienced at school a lot of the time was the fact that they didn't understand me culturally as a Black woman, right? As a young Black female. And so they may address me in a certain way that I would feel was disrespectful. But a white American young lady would not feel the same because culturally we're different. So I remember once I was walking down the hall, long story short, and I had somebody go like this, hey, you, hey, you. Culturally, right? I was always taught you don't snap at a person because they're not a dog, right? There's certain things you just don't do to people. So of course for me, I was like, nope, I don't appreciate that. And I had to be in an uncomfortable situation because I'm talking to my teacher, but I need a good grade. And I didn't know if that was going to affect my grade, right? And so in high school, it didn't. But in college, I was failed for speaking up. So there's levels to it. But I think for K-12, one of the things, those are some of the things that we can do where we are removing the police officers from the schools. We are making sure that educators and people who work with students down to parents and even janitors who work in the schools have not just racial equity training, but cultural training as well. And knowing and understanding that people's culture may be different and understanding that there is a difference between race and a difference between culture. That's two totally different things. Also, to speak to what everyone else here has said, making sure that we have opportunities to give people of color jobs. And it needs to be a job more than a janitor, right? And more than a para. Not that those jobs are not important, because they are. I feel like it takes a whole village to teach children. And I've worked in the education system myself. But I know that those are usually the jobs that they're willing to give people of color. And it comes off as, well, you should accept this. We're giving you something. Appreciate it. When there are so many people who are capable and have bachelor's degrees, master's degrees, doctoral degrees in education, but can't get a job, that doesn't make sense, right? They've had their experience and everything else. So I think those three things are kind of where we can start. So removing the peace officers, making sure that all of the staff have training about not just race and equity, but culture as well. And then also making sure that there's room for people of color who apply for jobs there. So are there any other questions? We do have a few minutes. And I know currently that was our only question. So we'll give probably like 30 more seconds here for anybody else who'd like to ask a question, and we'll answer it before we wrap up. No question? No? Okay, cool. So, of course, we are at the end of our discussion, our conversation, and we hope that all of our attendees learn something new. We hope that this conversation does not stop here on this Zoom call, but that you would continue to have these conversations with your friends, in your community, at home, in your households, you know, and that these conversations would be more than just a fly-by-night conversation, but it would be continual, and that this is something that we would hold our politicians to as well, because much like what everyone else said, you know, we matter, um, and that's something that is undeniable. We do definitely matter. We do have one more quick question, and it was, how do we find out who's running for school board? So you can go and look on the ISD 77 school district website, and I believe it's on their Facebook page as well. So you should be able to figure out who all of the candidates are, and hopefully that'll help find out a little bit more about them, help you find out a little bit more about them. Because of course that's important too. We have to normalize paying attention and voting on our local level as well. So I just want to say thank you to every attendee who's here. I thank you for knowing that this conversation is important and being willing to be a part of this conversation. I want to say thank you to all of my beautiful panelists. I really appreciate you all for coming and having this conversation and knowing how important it was, especially during Domestic Violence Awareness Month, because truly this is a huge part that ties hand in hand as well. And so I appreciate all of you. I love all of you and everything that you're doing. And y'all know I support you 100%. Y'all are all amazing. So thank you. Thank you to everybody. I appreciate the conversation.
Thank you. Have a great evening.
Thank you. You all too.
Have
Good
a
night,
great weekend.
everyone.
Thank you.
Let's
good
do
night,
it
everybody.
again.
Yeah, absolutely. Good night.